Do you know how to make short rows in the middle of a row in Tunisian crochet? If not, in this video, this is exactly what I'm going to show you how to do in Tunisian simple stitches, and you can use this knowledge to add short row bust shaping or back shaping or even belly shaping in garments that you will make from now on in Tunisian crochet. To make the best of this tutorial, you should be familiar with the types of short rows, the forward pass and return pass short rows, which I explain in detail in 2 separate videos with 3 methods each, and I will choose one method from each side to show you in this tutorial. So what's this short row bust shaping all about, and why do you need it? If you're a person with curves, you might benefit from adding some volume to the front of the clothes that you make, and that is usually achieved either by shaping on the side or by adding some extra rows in the middle of the fabric. For this particular video, I will demonstrate how to pick the number of short rows and the stitch counts needed for your size of project, which will depend of course on the gauge, and I will give you an example. I have here a chart, and I will take you step by step through the process of making short rows in the middle of the row to make something like this, and the opposite where you start with shorter short rows and go to the longer ones in the middle. But you can mix and match these types of short rows, and I will show you how to do that. You can follow along with a project of your own, and once you're familiar with the movement and the stitch count, you can adapt that to your own project. So let's start with the maths needed for figuring out how many rows and how long they should be in your project. The example I'm showing here is a summer top, but you can do this for any kind of garment, for sweaters and other things. So when do you want to add short row bust shaping? Normally, patterns don't include this kind of bust shaping because it takes a lot of time and skill to calculate the needed shaping for each cup size. So let's say we have 2 people with the same circumference at the bust apex. The 2 people might have a different cup size, which means the difference between the bust and the underbust. Here. So if you have a larger difference between the bust and underbust, you might benefit from adding short rows to your project. The thing is, if you don't add some fabric here, then making just a tube will make the fabric in the front ride up. So let's draw another fake body, and if you take this length and put it along this shape, it will come up here. So the belly will be exposed. You will have a difference here. Here you will have empty space. So you need to add some length in here to make the front longer so that the shirt or sweater comes to the same height on the back and the front. And we achieve this by making short rows. Now short rows don't start from the side seam. This is the side seam here on this drawing. And you notice that the short rows start from a point a bit forward on the front. In this example, they start 8 stitches from the edge. You will also notice that the short rows don't go all the way to the middle. It's important that the short rows are longer than the distance between the 2 apexes. So if we look at the front of a body, we have the apex, and the short rows will be at least as long as the distance between the apexes of the person. You can see this here in practice. This is the shortest short row here. So to calculate how many short rows and how long the short rows should be, you need to know your measurements. You need to know the back length, or in this case, it's the side length. You need to know the front length, so you measure along the front of the body, and then you calculate the difference between these 2 measurements. That will give you the height of the section of short rows. The maximum length is a bit shorter than the half of the circumference. This is the circumference, and you remove about 5 centimeters or 2 inches. And as discussed before, the minimum length will be the length between the apexes plus 1 or 2 inches or 5 centimeters. So once you have these numbers, you will be able to use the gauge that you have and calculate how many short rows you need and how big the difference between the different short rows should be. In the guide for customizing the fit of crochet garments that you get if you're an email subscriber, you have a link to a calculator that will let you calculate exactly how many stitches and rows you get for your gauge. And in this example, I assumed that the short row section would be 31 stitches long, including the first and last stitch, and 9 rows high. In this example, we have 8 rows because I wanted to keep the pattern of stripes on the side, but normally you want an odd number of short rows if you don't make stripes like in this case, or if you use narrower stripes of 1 row. It would be better to have an odd number of rows so that you have a nice V shape here when you finish the short rows. Now, to calculate the length of each short row, you will first need your difference here. You calculate how many rows you need the section to be in height based on your gauge, and then you take the difference between the maximum length and the minimum length of the short rows. You calculate this in stitches based on your gauge, and then you divide it by the number of rows you got here. It will not always be a perfect number, but you can go with approximate numbers and then have equal lengths between each short row, so the short rows are uniformly distributed. For example, here we have a difference of 4 stitches between the short row and the next. In the blog post, where you also have all of this written, you will also get the stitch numbers that I used for this top. So you will have 2 examples of stitch counts. The example from this chart, and if you have a stitch fiddle, you will be able to make a copy of this chart and edit it however you like. And you also have the stitch counts for this particular set of short rows, so you can see the differences and the similarities between 2 cases of short rows. Now we will do the practical part using this chart. In this chart, these are the Tunisian simple stitch symbols. This is the symbol for return pass. This is also a Tunisian simple stitch, but I colored the symbols so that you can see the short rows easier. And that's it. We have 9 rows, including the return pass. And we will begin with the shortest short rows, growing to the longest one, and then going down again in length. And then I will make 1 more repeat of this so that you have an example just like in this case. Where you want to use this kind of short rows, I recommend that you use the shortest one in the middle and the longest ones on the outside when adding bust shaping. But you can do the same for shaping of the back, for example, for a sweater, or in other cases you might use this first part. So let's get started. I will leave the chart on the table for reference, but I will explain everything I'm doing. And this particular pattern requires a 31 stitch base or foundation, so I will chain 30 and pick up 30 loops in the back bumps of the chains. I am using a sport weight yarn with a 5mm hook because this swatch will be quite big, so chain 30 and pick up 30 loops. After picking up the last loop, chain 1 and then yarn over pull through 2 to the beginning of the row to return and finish the first row of the pattern or the foundation row. This stitch pattern that I drew here actually consists of 3 short rows, then a full row, and then 3 more short rows and a full row, plus the foundation. And you will be using stitches from this second row to finish these rows. Even though it doesn't look like it, you will see in practice how this looks. It doesn't look as imbalanced as it seems here. So for the first short row, we have 12 simple stitches here, which will not be part of this short row. But you will see we will be using these loops to make the next short rows. So that's 12 simple stitches, and then we have 5 plus 1. Why do I say it like that? Because the 5 will be the actual short row. So this is how long the short row will be. And then we need one more loop to make the short row return pass. We do the short row return pass by doing a yarn over pull through 2 6 times, as we see here on the chart. Why do we make 6? Because the next stitch I'm going to pick up is this one, not this one. So I need to have the 5 stitches here fully created before I continue with the next short row. If I were to only yarn over pull through 5, then I would not have enough stitches to make the next short row. If you watched the tutorial on making return pass short rows, you know that now we don't have to do anything regarding this side, and we pick up loops to make the stitches for the next row. The next row has 10 stitches. That's 9 simple stitches. When you reach the end of the short row, you pick up the loop as you want to, depending on the method you chose, but I like to go behind the vertical and horizontal bar of the stitch below. 6, 7, 8, 9. So these are the 9 that will be part of the short row, and one more for the short row return pass. And then if you count here on the chart, you have 14 return passes. So again, we yarn over pull through 2. That's 14. So we have 13 simple stitches in the short row. Next up, we have to pick up 18 simple stitches, and we begin from the next stitch here. When reaching this stitch with the hole, we pick up the loop in the stitch below to close the hole. So that's 4. Again, we have the end of a short row. 14. And we do the return pass for 22 stitches. So yarn over pull through 2 22 times. This makes this short row 21 stitches long. Now in the pattern, we pick up loops all the way to the last stitch, where we make the regular last stitch, and then we do the regular return pass. So just simple stitches, careful about this end here. Simple stitches to the end of the row. And this is technically not a short row anymore, it's a full row, but it's part of the stitch pattern. At the end of the row, insert the hook behind the 2 vertical bars, draw up a loop, chain 1, yarn over both the 2 to the beginning of the row. And now we have reached this spot where we again begin with longer short rows, and we pick up 26 loops. The first 4 will not be part of the short row. And then we have the rest. And then yarn over pull through 2 22 times. And that's the 21 stitch short row. Next up, we pick up 18 stitches according to the pattern. And then we do the short row return pass 14 times. That makes a short row of 13 stitches. And next up, we pick up 10 simple stitches. And we do the short row return pass 6 times. This concludes the last of the short rows. And if you want to, you can now make the rest of the first row here, row 6, and then do the full return pass. Or we can continue from row 3 here to make the opposite again. I will continue from row 3 just to show you what it looks like to have this pocket forming when you have the shortest row in the middle. So for row 3, we pick up 10 stitches. Then we do the return pass for 14 stitches. Now we pick up 18 stitches. And do the return pass for 22. If you're noticing a pattern here, that's because there is a pattern. Each forward pass and each return pass has a difference of 4 stitches from the one before it. So the next one will be 26 stitches picked up, or going to the end of the row. When you encounter this gap, work in the stitch below the first short row, because that will prevent the gap from showing. So this is the last forward pass in this pattern. and then we chain 1, yarn over, pull through 2 to make a regular return pass, because we have all of the loops to take off the hook for this full row. We can make one more row to just close this gap and have a nice finish here. So don't go into this loop or this loop, but the one below. And if you want to stagger the short rows so that you don't work twice in the same stitch, you can do so as well. It's your choice. You can move these things around however you want, once you understand how the short rows work. So you only go forward to one point and then backward to another point, and you want the short rows to be centered, of course, but you might find some uses where you have uneven short row shaping, and that's your creative freedom. So now we have here a progression of short rows from short to long to short again. If we ignore the fabric on the top, this is what we get. Or a progression from long to short to long again, if we ignore the bit on the bottom. Both of them would work for clothing. I would suggest the second one for sweaters and tops. And you can check out the examples and the calculations that I share in the blog post and in the guide for customizing the fit of crochet garments, if you want to calculate how to do this for your own gauge and for your own project. But as a visual aid, I will provide this chart, and you can see here, you go one side and then come back, and then you go a bit more, and then you come back a bit more, you go again a bit more, come back a bit more, and keep doing this until you run out of stitches. Same here, you go forward and stop early and then come back and stop early here, then go forward, stop early, come back, stop early again. Keep doing this. So this is the principle of the short rows, and this is very similar in knitting as well, except you have knit stitches and purl stitches. If you work in a stockinette fabric, you will recognize this. But in Tunisian crochet it's easier because you don't need to make any fancy stitches on the ends of the short rows. All you have is the way you pick up loops when you encounter the end of the short row on the next row. So I hope this has been useful for you to figure out how to add short row shaping to your own garments. Check out the guide. If you're not yet subscribed to my emails, make sure you subscribe so you can get the guide for customizing the fit of crochet garments. It's not only about Tunisian crochet, it's about regular crochet and knitting as well, but the short row bust shaping example for now will be for Tunisian crochet, and maybe later on I will make also a guide on how to make short rows in regular crochet. But there you have different tools that you can use to make this kind of shaping. So if you're interested in more tutorials about Tunisian crochet, advanced techniques and similar things, make sure to subscribe to this channel because more content is incoming as I create more complex patterns and I need to explain concepts that have not yet been shared online. And check out the rest of the videos on this channel about Tunisian crochet short rows. If you're interested in this top pattern, I will put a link in the description for where you can buy the pattern, and it will have instructions on how to make a straight fabric, and then you can add shaping on your own and you have this tutorial, of course, for adding short row shaping in the front, and you also have instructions on how to add the shaping at the sides if you want to have a more emphasized waist. So I thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon with another video. Bye!